Okay. With a quorum of the board present, I call the meeting to order. Roll call. Commissioner Bakke here. Commissioner Evans.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Timbo.
Here.
Commissioner Lalonde.
Here.
Let's rise for a pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, as always, first item is the consent agenda. I'll back up. Do we need to hear the mission? I think everybody here has heard the mission, except for Casey, maybe 100 times. And the vision, but I will welcome, and please remember the board appreciates participation from the public. If you have any comments throughout the meeting, please stand, state your name and address, and your comments will be heard. I'm sure Dwight needs to know that. He hasn't heard that forever either. Okay, back to the consent agenda. Made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion, votes by any board member. Item number 1, approval of the board meeting minutes from January 2019. Number 2, payroll checks totaling $95,047.34. 3, maintenance and operation checks number 24445 to 24525, totaling $419,354.36. Approve the passenger facility charge totaling $55,000. And finally, the financial reports for January 2019. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have any discussion? Any items that would be further to this? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. And let's go for a vote. All in favor of the consent agenda as stated, speak by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed with a nay? I believe the consent agenda passes. Unanimous. To the director's report.
Yes, a lot to report on. I'll start off with street assessments. As you know, we've been in continued discussions with the city with regard to street assessments. We did meet with the city last week. I think the board committee and I concluded that a lot got done. Our attorney wasn't able to be at that meeting, but the city attorney and our attorney met late last week, and our attorney said his opinion is there's a lot of little things that we're not going to get through, and we're just kind of treading water. So the city has asked for a second meeting. The board committee is still in discussion as to whether or not we'll entertain that meeting. I think at a minimum we would like to see an agenda. As we've expressed to the board, there are very few things that we can actually agree to. So the amount of options we have are very limited, and especially now that we are where we are with the FAA, that limits it even further. And so the airlines met with the FAA last week, and on Friday, one of the airline representatives happened to bump into Kevin Willis, who's the head of compliance, FAA compliance in DC. And he indicated that the FAA is considering pursuing a formal Part 113 complaint. That's a really unusual step because the 113 complaint is usually launched by the airlines in response to a fee that they don't agree with. So I'm not sure in this case who the complainant is. It's sort of an inside-out way of using that particular regulation. The only thing I can think of is that the FAA would like to issue a national guidance that would impact all airports. And so rather than offering an informal opinion, they would rather have a formal opinion which would impact all the airports across the U.S. And so they may be using this as a way to do that. I think it does raise the profile that they may have a finding, they may well look for all the payments that we've made to the city and examine those, including things that probably should pay for and things that we have paid for, and so that will take months. I'm hopeful that they won't do that. The airlines also pointed out that the FAA has a tremendous number of misconceptions about the situation, which we're going to try to correct. Some of them are just things that the city has said that, you know, we don't agree with, that we think we need to put our marker out there. Others of which are just a misunderstanding of how the authority is formed. At the HQ level, they weren't completely clear that we're independent of the city. So we think that's an important fact for them to understand, because this isn't two parties that agree, that are trying to find a way to give the city money. This is us trying to uphold our sponsor certifications and the city trying to collect their street assessment. It's parties at odds, not parties in agreement. So we want to make sure the FAA understands that, because we don't want a punitive penalty because they think we're trying to do something we shouldn't be doing. So there were a couple other misunderstandings that I was frankly shocked the FAA didn't understand. So we're going to try to correct those in a letter. I also suggested that maybe I could meet with the region. There's an FAA conference coming up in, what, 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Roughly 2 weeks, out in Seattle. I may try to attend that because we would get an audience with the regional director out there, Carol Key, who I used to, Carol, whatever her last name is. I worked with her at SeaTac when I was, not with her, but she was with the FAA when I was at SeaTac. We worked together on some projects. And so it'd be a good opportunity to get some face time with her and just make sure everyone understands everything, that, you know, they understand they're welcome to call us. Another thing which was kind of interesting is the airlines wanted to understand, I think at the behest of the FAA, where our board is on this. You know, that because the city does appoint our board, and they want to feel as though the board is fulfilling its fiduciary responsibility to the authority and not just getting leaned on by the city, which I don't think anyone's suggesting that, including the city. But you know, those are relevant things that the FAA needs to understand. So I think it would be wise for us to go out to Seattle and attend that conference and spend some time with the region, send a letter to the FAA compliance manager. I actually reached out to him yesterday via phone and didn't catch him. But we'll do our best to kind of shore things up there and I guess await an FAA opinion. The city has asked for a second meeting, but given the limited progress we made in the first meeting and some of the comments from our attorney, we're still debating within the committee level whether or not that's advisable. You know, if we're likely to get drug into a Part 113 complaint, I think the least amount of things that we say right now is probably the better. And so, you know, I think we have to consider that a little carefully. So,
who is the author of the 113 complaint? I mean, who put that out? Is that the Department of Transportation or is that the FAA?
That's the FAA. It's the FAA's form for, I mean, like I said, typically what it is for is if anyone can launch a Part 113, a citizen could say, hey, I don't think the airport should be paying marketing fees to put ads in Chicago. So someone here in town could launch a Part 113 complaint, and the FAA would investigate that. But that's what's so odd in this case, is the FAA is almost self-referring it to an investigation, which isn't typically how these are done. So I'm not sure who they'll use as the complainant. They may use the city and say the city is the complainant, and it's sort of a reverse of the airport isn't doing something they should be doing, which I've never seen them do it that way. So it'll be interesting to see how that all comes about. I don't get the sense that's the final word, that the FAA hasn't decided that for certain. And so the airlines are anxious to see this get resolved because they've got other fish to fry, and so they would like to see it resolved quickly. So we're working with them. They also feel as though they would like to have some more feedback to the city. So I think they are going to reach out to the city again and try to schedule a meeting so the city can understand their point of view, which I think is relevant. They're a local business.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So John, back to when you first mentioned the potential for the 113 complaint, you said they may perhaps want to issue formal guidance. That in itself may not be a bad thing, that part, right?
Right, I mean, I think, yes. I mean, the formal guidance might be fine. Oftentimes, a Part 113 complaint, you end up with some type of punitive finding. And so that's what concerns me is, I want to ensure that the FAA understands that we have been trying to uphold our grant assurances. We've been trying to do our best to, work with the city, work within the FAA guidelines, and resolve this issue. And it's not a case of, like I said, friendly parties trying to find a way to do something we shouldn't be doing. The FAA needs to be clear on that.
And am I correct from the previous weekly bulletin that you put out that the FAA has taken it from the federal and sent, or from top level and brought it back to local?
So that's an interesting thing, is the compliance manager who oversees all compliance matters is indicating that they'll go to Part 113, which means it would stay at the federal level, and it would be a binding opinion, guidance across the industry. So, you know, the other airports in the region that are paying this, and actually nationally, you know, would have formal guidance to stop. Now, other information we got was that it was going to be referred back to the region in Helena, and that they would be issuing an opinion in the next couple of weeks. So there seems to be two mindsets within the FAA of how they're going to resolve this. In the past, I can see how they would do either. I can see them doing either. I don't know what they'll end up doing. So we're kind of in a no man's land right now, and that's another reason I want to reach out to the FAA and make sure they're clear on the facts, so they don't use a hammer to pound in a screw. We want to make sure they're using the right tool here.
Absolutely.
So when they send the auditors in, which you said chances are, they just going to look at this one issue, or are they just going to go like a shotgun, hit everything?
It's a good question. I don't know what all they'll want to do. The FAA, the revenue policy is extremely broad. They could look at everything we pay. Hopefully they would limit their field to things we pay to governments, which Maria reports that on a system called CATS every year. And so, in fact, it's even quarterly, isn't it, Maria?
It's annually.
Annually. Ideally, they would limit it to that and look at everything we've paid to the city for the last few years and ask for explanations and that type of thing. It's not to say that they have to limit it to that, and certainly if the airlines get in there and decide they want more looked at, then I think the FAA would probably be open to looking at more.
Does this have this sort of a 4-year tenure here, or is it all
Well,
this
the first street assessment agreement that I've been able to find in the file goes back to 2000. So the airport authority, the joint resolution between the city and the county that formally tried to make the airport authority the operator happened in '99. Now, they messed around trying to get property transferred, and the official sponsorship didn't change until 2001. So if you look at it in terms of this board, the airport authority has only existed since 2001 as the sponsor of the airport. And that's relevant because anything that happened prior to 2001 was the city in the FAA's eyes. The city was signing the grant assurances that said, thou shalt not divert revenue. The city was responsible for the sponsorship of the grants, for the oversight of the airport up until 2000. So when in our discussions, the city has repeatedly said, well, the airport used to pay full street assessments, and I've reminded them that not as the airport authority. Now, if you did that as the airport, that's between you and the FAA. You certified you weren't diverting revenue, and that's an issue for the city to resolve if we get into that, looking that far back. I can't imagine the FAA is going to look that far back. I've never seen that before. I guess it's possible.
But all the attorneys would agree on that point, right? I mean, we weren't. Okay, never mind.
I think agreement is hard to come by and hard to define in this current light, and I'm not even going to wade into it.
Okay.
But I think so. There's when we talk about that, I don't know that the city fully understands what we're saying
Oh,
about the sponsorship of the airport being since 2001.
right. Okay.
So how unique is that to this airport? And I'll plead a little bit of ignorance just because I'm new and still learning here, but this situation that we have with the city, is this happening elsewhere, or why is it becoming an issue here?
Well, it's becoming an issue here because the city brought the issue to the FAA. I don't know that it's unique. These issues bubble up. I mean, there's, so cities have impact fees, and the city would tell you this is not an impact fee, but it looks, talks, walks, and quacks like an impact fee. Cities have impact fees. In Colorado Springs, they have a stormwater impact fee. They have a street light impact fee. And the airport was exempted from both of them because the language is fairly clear. And so, bigger cities have all kinds of impact fees. And these issues come up from time to time where the FAA guidance essentially says, to summarize it, airports can't pay for anything that we don't receive directly. So another point of contention between us and the city is whose responsibility the roads are. And so we've tried to articulate to the city, number one, like for instance, you look at the University of Providence or the hospital or the school district, they are paying street assessments. However, they don't maintain the city streets next to their campus. So they're paying the street assessment and receiving a direct service. In our case, in the 95 annexation agreement, it says in there that the roads will remain public and the responsibility of the city. So we maintain our roads. So, we're both maintaining the road and being asked to pay a street assessment, which won't be used at the airport. So, in our mind, and not in the city's mind, I agree, we disagree on that one. It's a direct impact fee. We're paying for roads downtown. The city's argument is, well, the passengers that use the airport use the city streets. And so we ought to pay a portion of that. 10th Avenue is a state route. A lot of people use 10th Avenue to get to the airport. We don't have a single city street up here on Gore Hill that services the airport. On top of that, like I said, we're maintaining roads. Other businesses aren't maintaining roads. We pointed out also that the FAA has something called divisions of government. Airports have to be treated similar to other divisions of government, like school district. They're not maintaining the roads, so there's a difference there. The park district doesn't even pay impact fees. So there's an argument that we shouldn't be paying because Parks District doesn't pay. The city itself is not collecting street assessments for use of their buildings. For instance, Mansfield Center, they have events there. Those public are getting to the events somehow, right? City employees are getting to work. They're using city streets. Shouldn't the general fund be paying a portion of the? So, there's a whole bunch of arguments that we don't agree on with the city and that's why it's almost too complicated to really expect that we could sit down and resolve it. Because we just don't see eye to eye on any of those issues. So yeah, it's not uncommon to have these. What is uncommon is for it to go beyond, here are the legal arguments, read them, and you can see that we can't pay an impact fee. That is very uncommon. Very few of these have risen to this level.
So the next step is the committee, or what's happening next? You're waiting
So
to hear where it's going, FAA?
The committee, it's kind of bouncing around in the committee right now as to whether or not we should have another meeting with the city, whether we think anything could get done in that meeting. We're also trying to find out what the FAA is thinking and how best can we support the FAA in collecting the facts that they need to make this decision. And then on top of that, the airlines are looking to re-engage to try and figure out how they can help explain why this issue is meaningful.
So if it's taking a few weeks for the FAA, for example, to decide what they're doing, what is the harm of wait and see?
I think the biggest concern we have had throughout is first of all, the airlines may get fed up and files a Part 113 complaint, and say, well, you've had these street assessment agreements where you've paid these admin fees, we think that's revenue diversion. And they might do that in order to fry fish from another battle they have. So they're doing these all the time, and they might say to themselves, well, this is an easy one for us to defeat, and that would set a precedent that we could use elsewhere. So we want to pursue this one. So that's part of the problem is, certainly in a Part 113 complaint, and I think the city is a little frustrated with us that the airlines are involved, but the compliance office in DC is monitored closely by the airlines, and once it got to that level, once the city pressed it to that level, we had no choice but to engage the airlines because first of all, our airline agreement says right in it that any new fee, such as the onset of full street assessments, we have to tell the airlines that we're going to charge them. And then on top of that, it was incumbent upon us to tell them before they found out through the compliance office to preserve any options we have and let them know, again, this isn't a friendly fire situation here where we're trying to find a way to do this. This is two parties trying to resolve a conflict about whether or not this should happen. And, we're trying to fulfill our fiduciary role, and not trying to charge.
Didn't that
people.
stuff that you sent to us months ago show that like airports like Newark, International Airport there, or JFK, or LaGuardia, where they were finding
Those
the
are Part
same
113
issues?
complaints, yes.
Oh, absolutely.
So all the articles that we printed, and I think we gave the city copies of those are examples of Part 113 complaints, where the airline says, hey, Houston, you're paying exorbitant chamber fees, we want that money back. Or hey, JFK, you're paying the city for bridges that are off of the airport campus, we want that money back.
So if, let's say they are successful in sending us a bill with a penalty, who pays it? The city, or is it going to come out of our airport funds?
It comes out of the airport funds,
Or is it recollected from the city?
Yeah, well, then that's the question. Do we have recourse to pursue the city? Or would we do that? I'm not suggesting we should or could or anything. I'm just saying, what is, what do we do with that? Yeah.
And on the other side of the spectrum, if the airlines were to lose, the city were to win, who would be paying, where would the funds come from?
The airport would charge the airlines.
So
Yeah.
they would come directly from the airlines.
Yeah, and as we've explained to the city, this is a precedent-setting situation that would impact 300 other commercial airports. And that's why the airlines are so interested is, ours is small potatoes, but in JFK and in, Denver and these other major metropolitan areas, this could easily become millions of dollars. And so, that's why these protections are in place, is to avoid this. And, it was interesting in our meeting because, I-15, the city agrees is exempt because of federal regulations. Well, how's it any different? We're both Department of Transportation. We fall under the same DOT, and, there are federal regulations that prevent airports from paying these same fees. When the FAA gives you a couple thousand acres for an airport, you're exempted from taxes. That's why we don't pay property taxes. That was the other thing I asked too is, okay, so, this is small potatoes. If we're gonna pursue something, why don't you guys ask for property taxes? It's the same regulations we're up against, and that's a heck of a lot more money. So how is it any different?
So going forward from here, big thing that's gonna happen first off is you guys are gonna draft a letter to the FAA clarifying their misconceptions and get that sent off. And then within the committee, you guys are going to decide if it's worth having another meeting with the city before any other rulings come down with a 113
Right.
complaint.
And then we're going to try to figure out how the FAA wants to proceed. Because I think it's important for us to be engaged in that process because most of the outcomes fall on our shoulders, and so we need to, play a role in that.
And what's going to be the determining factor whether you go to Seattle?
I think we'll probably go.
Oh,
no matter
I'd say you need to
I
go
think we
either
should
way.
go.
Yeah, because it's coming up too short. It's in 2 weeks, and,
Right.
and the regional director will be there. So I think it's just an opportunity for us to have a little FaceTime with Carol and try to clear up some of these things. I was kind of surprised how many things that weren't quite well understood on that call, it sounds like. So
Well, I urge you to go. It
Yeah.
sounds like that's a
And
key.
best case scenario, if the airlines meet with the mayor and are able to clarify with him and he says, okay, we're out, and the city withdraws its request for street assessments.
yeah, as we're calling it, unring the bell. And I think there still is opportunity for that. And, I suggested, it was asked at the meeting, I suggested, well, it's as easy, I think, as notifying any of the FAA people that you've been talking to that it's been settled locally and there's no need to continue with the question. I think that would suffice and the FAA would back away from it and let it be. So.
And they would stop their attendance from now.
I think so. Now, the only thing that could happen from, the airlines might say, nah,
Yeah.
we've started this ball rolling, why don't you keep it on rolling? But, in my discussions, of course, the airlines are all different. One of them can cause the issue to go. But in my discussions with the airlines so far, they just want to see it resolved without setting, a precedent nationally. So, yeah, they, I think, would not continue a complaint if we got it resolved.
Any more discussion on this issue? Anything else on the director's report?
Yes. So United Airlines has extended the Chicago service through Labor Day. We found that out last week. The tickets are now on sale. That adds about another 20% capacity to the route. We had about 180% capacity added last year. And so we're really excited. We just put out a press release actually this afternoon. But we're really excited to see the route go beyond the traditional sort of school vacation season, to see how we would do in those shoulder weeks at the back end of August when the state really slows down. I think that'd be a good indication of what the route would look like if we continued it on into September, and maybe even all the way to Christmas. And so we're pretty excited to see that route continue to grow. It's an important route for us, a very successful route for us, and I think it whets United's appetite for further expansion. So really good news there. The other thing I was going to report is our expense budget is under pressure. We've exceeded our overtime budget here in the last month, and we've also blown through our temporary staffing cost budget for the year. So it's likely that we'll be coming back to the board either in March or April with a budget variance to increase the operating budget for the year. We've got to sit down with Maria and Rod and kind of go through the operating budget and see if we can steal a few funds from somewhere else so that it's not a direct increase in the operating budget, but possibly we can defer some things into next year and make up some of the difference. But we think it's probably in the neighborhood of $20,000 at this point if the winter doesn't continue like this on through March. So we'll see what we can do to defray some of that cost and then bring a budget variance to the board at some point this spring. And the other thing I was going to report is the concessions transfer on Friday. The Oakwells team is in-house preparing for that. They ordered their food today so that they'll have something to serve come Friday morning. And the first wedding is on Saturday, so it's right into the fire. 350-person wedding. They were telling me today that the fire marshal's going to be there, so they're very worried about making sure it goes well. So
Part of the wedding, not official
yeah,
capacity.
yeah, that's what I asked too, and they said no, he's invited. So so I think this is it'll be a good test for them to see how the weddings go in the very first week of their contract. And yeah, we're pretty excited to see this transition. Oakwell seems very excited about this opportunity, and so far they've been really good to work with. And both them and Air Host seem to be getting along well. So yeah, we think we'll survive this week. And yeah, it's too bad
Is it going to be up in the big room?
Yeah, I think actually they're going to use both rooms. So that's what I have on the director's report.
Excellent. All right, capital project update.
Yeah, nothing has gotten done. In the last month, we really haven't been able to accomplish anything. The steel did show up for the SRE building expansion. The one good news is the hangar doors are not even close to going up, so that window of potential Cat 3 outage is beginning to close. As the FAA, I just talked to them last week, they still anticipate they'll be here in May to install the localizer upgrade. So the longer that hangar doesn't have the doors up, the shorter the window is for a potential Cat 3 outage. As we've said in the weekly report, the Cat 3 outage probably isn't going to have a significant impact. If we have some very low visibility conditions, FedEx is probably most impacted. But by the time we get it to April, typically the weather's good enough that we don't have a lot of low visibility days. So yeah, as we go through the next couple of weeks, if the snow does allow them to begin working on the hangar again, the FAA has indicated that once the doors are up, they'll bring their instruments out. They'll go down the runway and check the localizer to see if the signal's too weak, and so we'll actually have an idea whether or not they can continue to operate the Cat 3 once those doors are up. And then ideally it'll continue to work and we won't have an outage at all. But at this point, it looks like we'd be down to probably 60-day outage at most by the time the FAA gets out here to upgrade the localizer. And ideally, the ground will be clear by May so that we can actually build the localizer expansion. So we'll see.
Well, at the angle of the building, I find it hard to believe that the doors are going to create that much more reflectivity compared to the sidewall that's already up.
Yeah.
So,
And that's a good point. I mean, the FAA, their model is not extremely precise. So it could be that there's not as much of an issue. We've pointed out to the FAA that The front range hangar that was supposed to be built 2 years ago was in their model also, creating a blockage, and that never was built, so, there might not be as much interference as they're expecting. I was really relieved that they were willing to come out and actually measure the signal before they just shut it off, so.
Okay, first item on the agenda, task order number 23-219, improvements to engineering, design, and building services.
Yes, as you may recall, C.H. Schume Hill, now Jacobs, is under contract on a 5-year retainer with us to do the design, engineering, and construction management for our capital program. And so the contract is already approved, but every year we bring back the task orders so we can actually authorize the individual work that happens under that contract. And so task order 23 includes the capital program for this year. You can see in the packet there, Rod has negotiated the fees with C.H. Schume Hill using an independent fee assessment, and we've derived a fee there. We're still working on this scope a little bit to try and determine what level of service we want for the tank removal. Rod and I haven't had a chance to meet in the last week or two, but we may scale that back a little bit because we don't feel that we need full-time construction management on that project. We think we can find a contractor that can get the tanks out of the ground and remediate it. We don't know what level of design we need, so we may scale that back a little bit. And then the snow plow or the snow blower, FAA it's on the agenda later on, but FAA is indicating that funding for that is decreasingly likely, and so we may not actually execute that scope of work at all. So there may be a couple of these items that get pulled out of the scope. Right now, we're proceeding as though the snow blower money might come, just in case there's an FAA dropout at the end, but it's not looking likely. So chances are we'll actually scale back some of this task order before it's finally executed. But we would like the board to proceed with the approval of the task order so we can work on design for the fog seal and some of the other longer lead items that are in that task order.
So the task order that I'm looking at basically is saying the proposal, task order 23, the amount of fee proposal is $416,552 for the said construction and design of that. So that would be a not to exceed fee.
It is a not to exceed, yes, and so we'd like to get approval for that. And like I said, we may scale back the scope of work and take out a couple tasks, but for right now, we want to leave them in there just because we haven't gotten a full answer from the FAA and we haven't determined what level of reduction we want to that tank farm remediation yet.
So do I have a motion to accept the task order number 23-219, improvements to engineering, design, and building for the total amount of fee proposal of $416,552 as described in the memo?
Yes, I'll make that motion. Thanks for saying it for me.
Any further discussion?
John, just on your comment that the snow equipment might be scaled up, just lack of funds, you mean?
Well, it's such a low priority in the FAA system. The FAA has each type of project priority rated, and in some years they don't have a lot of high priority projects, and so they might put lower priority in there.
Okay.
Now, a few years ago, the FAA went through a big exercise to rewrite the snow plans for airports, and they increased the amount of work for us to do on the runways. And so, as part of that discussion, we've been very vocal that we think it's unfair that the snow equipment receives such a low rating, and yet they can pile all of these additional requirements on us to go out and get it down to where it's completely bare. And we were spending, what would you guess, Rod, at least 20-30% more time on the runway surfaces than we used to.
Yeah, it's pretty constant.
And so, the amount of work, has really increased. And so, and of course in the South, they don't even have snow equipment. So it's really unfair to a small subset. And as it turns out, a lot of the airports that rely on the snow equipment are relatively small, like all of the Montana airports. And it costs us the same. It's not like in Denver where a new runway might cost them $100 million and only costs us 30. A piece of snow equipment costs everyone the same. So it's a disproportionate impact on the smaller northern airports that are peers. So we've asked them to consider moving the priorities up, and they did indicate they were going to work harder to try and fund snow equipment. So we immediately put in a discretionary request for snow equipment, to kind of, see if their money was where their mouth was. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it will be this year.
Send up some pictures, for God's sakes.
And that's a 90% match, right?
Yeah, it's a 90% match, and so, the snow blower is the most expensive piece of equipment we can buy. They're very pricey, and so we really wanted to get that one out there to the FAA. So it doesn't look like it'll get funded this year. What we're likely to do is pull it back and wait and see if next year or the year after there might be funds available, and continue to try to work the FAA on this issue of snow equipment being such a low priority. Because a lot of airports really got caught flat-footed, and there were a tremendous number of closures the last 2 years because they didn't have the amount of equipment to deal with the new snow guidance. And we got in front of it. We were fortunate because we've been investing quite a bit in our combi units, and we have those 3 big combi units, plus the ramp hog and other things, the de-icing truck. I mean, we have made millions of dollars in investment on our own from our own surplus funds to upgrade our fleet. The one piece of equipment we haven't been able to increase to purchase is the blower. But we do have 2 blowers we got from Malmstrom when they surplused their equipment out there. So they're relatively low hours. They're just pretty old.
Do they run?
They do. They do. Yeah, those are our blowers, and that's all we really have.
Well, I think it's a really good idea to have it in the system, just like last year, we didn't think we'd get the 4th bay for the snow removal building, but be ready because we were ready for it. When the money came down, it would float easily into it.
Yeah, and in fact, on that point, I probably should have put it in the director's report, but we did hear from the FAA just this week, they've approved our 15% amendment. So we'll be able to amend our grant out 15%. So we are closing that funding gap that we had last year. Of course, we borrowed money from buildings which we have to repay this year. But the things that we put in place to try and limit our funding are coming to fruition. So.
Any other discussion on that? Do I have a second on the motion for the task order number 23?
Second.
Awesome. And with no other discussion, we'll have a vote. All in favor of accepting task order number 23-219 as previously stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. The motion passes. Number 2, emergency terminal repairs.
Yes, as you've probably read in the packet here, on February 16th, we had a fire main come apart underneath the terminal just over here. If you look out the window, you can actually be able to see the area. But there's a bridge structure underneath the concourse that isn't enclosed, and that fire main runs under that bridge.
I got a picture here. It's directly over John's head if you want to take a look at it.
That bridge structure runs the full length of the concourse, and it is insulated. There's basically some lightweight decking and then rolled insulation laid on top of the decking that encloses the bottom of that concourse where all the utilities run through. We have to heat it because that 4-inch water main obviously would freeze, and there's a small service line in there too. In this case, we haven't really figured out yet why the main came apart. It came apart at a joint, which just might be freeze thaw kind of working that joint loose. It could be the surges from the new water tank kind of working that joint loose. And it could be the busted threads. We haven't really thawed it out enough to tell. But it came apart, it flooded the decking fell, ruined all the insulation, and opened that area up to the elements. And so we had another pipe freeze, the little service line that was in there freeze and burst. And Rod was able to get Guy Tobacco to come out and close that area with some concrete blankets and visqueen to try and get it heated. And we've been using various heating devices to try and keep that area warm enough not to have further damage. But we haven't yet determined for certain how we want to repair it. I'm leaning towards finding a heavier weight decking and then getting kind of a sandwich panel where we have a heavier decking on the bottom, followed by some styrofoam insulation or rigid insulation, and then a cover coat of metal on top of that. We need to get into that area to service it. So it'd be nice if we could design a system that we could crawl through that area to get to there's internet lines, there's a couple water lines, there's heat ducts, communications, there's all kinds of stuff in there. You could have drop-down panels every so often, but of course the area you're trying to get to will never be where the panel is. So ideally, if we could find a system where we could crawl in there safely. The current system is suspended, it's lightweight decking, and it's suspended with just, it looks like aluminum wire, kind of like a drop ceiling.
Just like this.
Yeah, pretty much this. And so it's really not something that we want to put a guy in to crawl around on safely. And so trying to find something a little more rigid. We really don't see any value in enclosing that whole area. The other option would be just to wall it in and go ahead and heat it with the terminal heat. It's about another 3,000 square feet. It would be acceptable storage. It's just we don't have anybody right now asking for storage. So we're not sure we could rent the space. We don't really have any storage needs over here that are that great. So our thought is to not enclose it. Just creates one more thing we'd have to heat and keep clean, and it would almost have to be sprinkled. There is a sprinkler line there, so we might be able to drop heads off of that and sprinkle the area. But then we're going to have that system balanced, and is there enough capacity in there? I mean, it opens a whole host of issues if we enclose it that we don't think we need to open. And so right now we're considering just leaving it as is and replacing kind of like with like. I looked ahead at the procurement policy, and this is far in excess of what I can authorize under a emergency. So we have to refer to the state policy, which is referred to in our procurement policy, which allows us to declare an emergency with a 3/4 vote of the board. And so we would like to declare an emergency in order to make these repairs. We're already incurring thousands of dollars in costs just to enclose that area and heat it, and then we've got to repair it. And so we expect the total budget for this project is going to be $125,000 to make the repairs that we need and deal with the temporary condition. And so what we ask the board to do is to certify an emergency as described in MCA 7-5-4303, and we further ask the board to authorize emergency capital funds of up to $125,000 to make repairs to the terminal.
Now, you did say when we were out looking at it down below that the vertical door goes into the TSA area. Does TSA have any future plans of expansion that moving in this direction could potentially
No, it's funny. Anything happens in this building, TSA gets flooded. I mean, they're in the exact worst place. They're right below the meeting rooms, so when the drain backs up, they get flooded. Because in years past, the folks cleaning up the meetings, pour stuff down the drain that probably shouldn't go down the drain, and so that backs up. And they got flooded because of the water line that burst. We actually want to move TSA to the exact opposite side of the building, kind of where Chris's office is, next to the rental car company. There's some old space back in there. I think the weather service used to be in there. It was the most recent tenant many years ago. And so there's pretty good space back in there. We've told the TSA we will not renew their contract, which caused them a lot of consternation. But how many more years do they have, Laura? 2?
Yeah.
About a year and a half, 2 years. And so we've told them at that point they will have to move. The master plan calls for expansion of the terminal this direction. The American ticket counters, I call it, where we would put American if they came. What we would essentially do is the hallway next to Allegiant that goes back to TSA, we would infill that with a ticket counter, and then we would ram through the TSA break room with a new run out for the bags that would go back through there and access the garage area behind there. Centralized baggage system that was in the terminal plan last week envisions that will actually take that entire hallway out, build more ticket counter, build more bag run out, and then blow through the TSA offices that are right here underneath us, and that will become the new hallway to exit outside. So basically put the hallway here, infill the hallway that's there, put more ticket counter in, and then push the TSA offices out. So they've been told already that we won't renew that contract and they need to move.
I meant to ask that when we were down there, if that would have any impact for that area with the baggage.
Yeah, so that area where we were back in there, not necessarily this area over here, it could, but of course we would do anything we need to do with that project, we'd do with that project. I mean, they may need more lateral space. I doubt it though, because we have that huge overhang under the back of the building now where the expansion is. That's all overhang. There's nothing There's no vertical wall back there. And so basically that entire baggage system we would wall the back of the terminal down to the ground onto the ramp level, and that whole area would become the new baggage system. And then the offices, basically where the bags are being made up today, where we walk through and where the scanners are, that would become the new airline offices. And then the ticket counter would recess back in there 20 or 30 feet. So we'd have, the only difference you'd see today is you'd have a drop ceiling, low drop ceiling, where the ticket counters would be back in there a lot further. We'd have more queuing space out in front where the airline rope lines would be. And then you'd have a gap for circulation between the rope lines and the doors, so that when you're in the back of the line, you're not constantly popping the door open by moving around. So that's the problem we have today, is the lines invariably back into the doors. And so then when somebody comes in the outer door, you get this Arctic blast right into the building because both doors end up open. So yeah, that space over here would not be really impacted by the baggage system, but all of that airline space just next to it would be.
And there was some discussion, but there is no impact on frozen lines underneath the cafeteria area / inside of the security area.
In this same project, we want to address that same problem. We had some frozen lines in the same time period, just immediately before this line burst. We had the drain lines and some of the beverage lines frozen. And so what we want to do there, the back of the building tees into the new expansion. And those lines run in below the floor, just like over here. Those lines all run through the floor. And so it's insulated, but there's no source of heat in that gap. And so the other thing we've been working with the contractor on is find a way to tie the furnace system into that area so that we bleed some hot air into that insulated space around those beverage lines and the drain lines on the extension of the terminal. So along with this project, we want to find a way to heat that subfloor. And the same thing we'll likely do over here. When we put back that ceiling, all of the heat lines run underneath that floor. So if we can pop some access panels into that heat duct, we can bleed some heat into that area, just so it doesn't get incredibly cold. And we don't need to keep it any warmer than 35 degrees. But we want to generate some heat in there. We don't think the heat will be lost because it's insulated, so that heat's just going to come up through the floor anyway. So pumping a little bit of heat in there shouldn't hurt anything. So Rod's been working with some contractors even prior to this event to try and find some solutions for those drain lines behind what we call Rockies, underneath the restaurant over there, to try and fix that. It's had some issues. Only when we get a week or two of really cold weather, like we've had a month of, then those lines get enough cold on them to freeze. And we need to remedy that also.
Are there any issues with the other concourse at the other end of the building?
No, we've discussed that. Once we kind of see what kind of system we come up with here, we may come back and ask for a capital project to do something similar over there, once we kind of figure out what the solutions are. There isn't a whole lot of wet utilities in that side either, just the sprinkler lines. So I mean, we don't want to, heat that entire area if we don't have to, but that side gets the wind, so I would imagine it's a few degrees colder even than over here. And we kind of want to see what happened to this drain line. If it just simply came unscrewed somehow, we probably want to get in there and check those joints and make sure we don't have that similar condition there. But if it's bursting, then we probably want to think about a different solution over there, because I'm sure it's the same construction method. It's just rolled bats on top of that decking, which is just kind of hung from the bottom. It's not a very robust system.
And not very thick inside.
No, it was one single row of bat. I don't know what R that was either. I mean, it looked like a 13 or something. It wasn't real.
Probably not much.
Yeah, it didn't look like a whole lot of anything. But obviously we have to sprinkle those areas, so the water's going to have to get there somehow.
Mr. Chair?
right.
I will make the motion that the board certifies an emergency as described in Montana Code 7-5-4303 and includes emergency capital funds up to $125,000 to repair the damage.
I will second that. And since I was remiss previously, I'll make the statement: if there are any agenda items that present a conflict of interest and subsequently require a member to abstain from the vote, please so note. Now that we're official. Okay, so the motion has been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? All right, let's vote on the emergency terminal repair order. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. All right, and then the third item, the CenturyLink Communications has been withdrawn from the agenda since the CenturyLink has changed their mind. So
At the
we'll-
moment.
What's that?
At the moment.
At the moment. So we will get with Alan, and we'll finish up with any airport authority board comments. Casey, anything you'd like to add?
Sure.
Anything else?
No, sir. No.
Comments from? All right. That, additional public comments? Outstanding. All right, no further business come before the board. I declare this meeting adjourned. Let's take 10 minutes. Well, let's call it 5.5. We'll be back at the top of the hour at 2 o'clock with the working session. 1 hour flat or less.
That was fast.
That was fast.
Hey, the county put on a train everybody thing right at the beginning of February. It was fantastic.
Oh, downtown? Yes. Yeah, I went to that last year. I did. The question is what I forgot. Yeah.
You reported?
Yeah.
So, can I ask?
Hey.
That heater's